It was a proper disaster, but it didn't cause strange glowing plants to emerge or mutants or ferals. But it was very serious, and we just thought it was an interesting spin-off point for sort of alternate fiction. My name's Jason Kingsley. I'm the CEO and creative director and co-founder of Rebellion.
Hi, I'm Ben Fisher. I'm head of design at Rebellion, and I acted as creative director, I suppose, on Atomfall. So I helped bring the ideas together and bring the whole project into land.
And obviously we're here today to talk about Atomfall. It's probably be helpful, particularly for some of our listeners who aren't massive gamers, just if you gave us the sort of elevator pitch for Atomfall, kind of what kind of game is it and what's sort of notable about it?
Atomfall is a survival action game set in a quarantine zone in 1950s, 1960s England. The player wakes up, they don't know who they are, and the sort of core of the game is investigating sort of in a detective fashion to uncover what the mystery is that triggered a quarantine zone around the Windscale plant. The world's first major nuclear disaster in 1957, the fire in the Windscale plant was triggered by what was later uncovered to be generational plutonium for bombs. What we thought would be interesting was to take that as a sort of trigger point for a fictionalized version of the disaster, and to tell a kind of period, sci-fi period, speculative fiction story where the player uncovers what that mystery is and what it means.
Yeah, it was a proper disaster, but it didn't cause strange glowing plants to emerge or mutants or ferals or dangerous cults. But it was very serious, and we just thought it was an interesting spin-off point for sort of alternate fiction, and very strongly based on the sort of British-style science fiction works of the time. So your own Doctor Who and your own Quatermass experience were a big part of it, and lots of classic books that are well worth reading even today, like Day of the Triffids or John Wyndham's The Chrysalids, that kind of thing.
The Windscale fire, I must confess, actually, it wasn't something that I was very familiar with, and from speaking to people, I don't think many people are actually. Seems to have faded from the memory a bit. I'm guessing, obviously, when you're making the game, you went up to the local area and what have you. Is there much of a kind of legacy of the fire up there? Do people up there still remember it?
I don't think so. I went up there long before the game was actually kicked off at Rebellion, and went there with my partner taking photographs. And of course, there is an active nuclear power station there. It's called Sellafield. There are people that work there. We've had people in the comments and social media saying, "Oh, I work at the Sellafield power plant. I'm really looking forward to playing this game," which is a bit weird because, you know, that's sort of quite meta. And people from what was called Cumberland there, which isn't called Cumberland anymore. You know, I went up the coast there. It's absolutely beautiful, but quite bleak. Beautiful part of the world. And then, of course, if you go slightly inland, you get to the Lake District. And yeah, there've been all sorts of typically British comments about it's just another weekend in the north of England, kind of sarcastic comments about people. But obviously, we turn it up to, well, beyond 11, actually.
Yeah. I mean, even the hairiest of nights out in a British provincial town centre would struggle to match some of the things you see in Atomfall, I'm sure. But yeah, just on the Lake District setting as well, that's something that has got a lot of attention, actually. And how did you go about rendering that into a game form?
We sent teams up there to do what's called photogrammetry, where we take hundreds, sometimes thousands of photographs of places and objects and things with permission, and then sort of render them into 3D form. But Ben can tell us a bit more about that, because the team went up there and wandered around, because we have quite a varied team from different backgrounds. So we've got people from all sorts of parts of the world. So for people that live in Britain, you're probably more familiar with the Lake District than people that come from France or, you know, from America. So I think for a lot of them, Ben, they all seem to have fun up there, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are things that as locals, it's easy for us to forget are like unique to Britain, that are unusual. So having those varied perspectives on what stands out really, really helped, including things like the sort of lead artist on the project is from Seattle and was mystified by dry stone walls. So, it was fun to make sure we capture those local details like that, and to make sure we had tools that could generate dry stone walls so we could build them in the game. Part of the process was making sure we had a toolkit to let us build a kind of an accurate, slightly kind of theme parkish version of the environment. But yeah, having dry stone walls in the game that are older than America itself was all part of the fun.
Good bit of transatlantic banter there, I'm sure. And it's really interesting that you had international members of the team on there, because I was looking back and I think Atomfall, there's quite a buzz around it. People are excited to get their hands on it, I think. And I think the setting does have a part to play in that, and there don't seem to be a huge number of, I'm going to say, high-profile games that are set outside London. And well, first of all, I wondered, did you have any thoughts on why that might be the case?
I think possibly because a lot of the bigger companies that fund games, the studios, if you like the movie studios, the game studios, are largely US based, or they're Japanese, or there aren't that many. Well, I don't think there are any big games publishers in the UK specifically. And the UK, I think, to understand certain aspects of our culture, you've got to dig into it a little bit, because we tend to understate things quite a lot. And we also have a very different, for example, gun culture is very different in this country than it is over in the States. And guns feature heavily in a lot of games, not all of them, of course, but in a lot of them. So there's a natural tendency to want to go down that route, I think, for simplicity. So, no, I just think it's one of those things that I bet you there are a few more that start to turn up as a result of Atomfall's success. So I think it's quite likely people will look at our heritage a little bit.
The real kind of creative challenges we set for ourselves was to lean into those specific regional differences, meaning, region meaning UK, but also meaning not London. So, like Jason was saying, leaning away from making the game feel like a shooter, making it feel more like a detective game.
Yeah, and expressions as well, Ben, because we've got there's certain gesticulations that characters, the enemies, will make to you, which are very British, which some people will know of as quite rude, and sort of expressions like "off," which again means slightly different things in places like America. And the US is a huge market, of course. It's about 40% of the games market overall. But we wanted to introduce them to some of the more salty expressions that the Brits will use from time to time.
Look forward to lots of American gamers telling people to bugger off, I think. But yeah, and on the point you're making, I guess, on that international appeal and there being a sort of understandable focus on the USA, because it is such a huge market, and I think a lot of the big players are based there. Do you think Rebellion would have had as easy a time getting this game commissioned if it didn't have the independence that it does?
Gosh, it was an interesting thought. Yes, I think so. Yeah, I mean, we have the luck to be fully independent. The company's owned by me and my brother. We don't have any investors. We don't have any external shareholders. So it's just us, and we're gamers. We like games. We like kind of creativity, YouTube, that kind of thing. And so really the games we make are the sort of games we want to play, and that seems to work quite commercially well. There's always a tension between creative pressures when you're making something, whatever it might be, a TV show or a movie or a big game, with the sort of senior management at the funding structure. And that can cause great things to be made, but it can also cause disasters, quite frankly, sometimes, as we all know. So we're very lucky to self-fund, and we do it from start to finish all the way up. So I'm not sure we're unique in the world, but we're pretty close to being unique in the world at being able to do that.
Yeah, I don't know of any other game company that operates in the same way, and I think it's fantastic. It's very freeing. I genuinely believe that if you started with a blank piece of paper, you wouldn't end up with an Atomfall. It's part of our kind of unique creative process, and all of the most interesting stuff in the game emerged over time as a result of that.
How do you kind of sense check the ideas that you and your brother have, assuming that, from what I understand, Atomfall was kind of quite a passion project for yourself, Jason? Is there a way that you just sort of sense check your ideas, make sure that they are kind of gelling with the rest of the team and people aren't being carried along with what the boss wants?
When you're discussing a project and everybody leans forward and is sort of sparking ideas and coming up with new ideas, rather than going, well, I think that's a terrible idea. I mean, that would be a rude thing to say in a meeting, but we'd also encourage it. It has been said, and sometimes we'll overrule it. But generally speaking, I think you can tell by the engagement of the team. And a game like Atomfall is made by a big team of talented people, from the most experienced all the way down to juniors, and every single discipline plays an important role in it. And what we try to do is we try to encourage people to give us feedback on things. We may not agree with that feedback, but we want to try and encourage an environment where people can be self-critical as well. And generally, I think it's something that Chris and I have developed over the years, is a sort of sense that if we like this game, there's a fair chance quite a lot of other people will as well. So we don't do much in the way of market analysis or data grinding to try to work out how to make a game fun, because it's a little bit like saying, how do you make a good movie? How do you make a great TV show or a great podcast or a good YouTube channel? It's quite hard to write it down afterwards. You sort of have to have the passion. You have to go with the flow and try and modify and add to it. I mean, Ben, you've been at the sort of deep end, really, in terms of getting this across the line. And in its early days, it did sort of wander in lots of different directions. But we finally grabbed the game and realised what was fun after probably a couple of years' worth of prototyping to get here.
That's part of the process, really, that Rebellion games have a consistent set of creative pillars that they tend to drive towards. Mostly inspired by Jason and Chris, what you prefer, and it means that the audience expects that, and it means that people are attracted to those sorts of games. So it all lines up perfectly. And then the creative process is finding the best solutions, where you've got a theme that you want to explore, a set of creative pillars that you want to express, and you try things and you see what works and improve and iterate over time.
Atomfall is going to debut on Game Pass, and there was a report recently from the Entertainment Retail Association, I think I've got that right, saying that subscription services were one of the big sort of growth areas in gaming. And I suppose the question is, are services like Game Pass becoming more important to companies, whether that's Rebellion or sort of more industry-wide? And what do you make of comments that some people make about it putting people off paying for games proper?
But I think it's all complementary, actually. And one of the things we've noticed when we do a Game Pass deal, and Atomfall is available day one on Game Pass, what actually happens is people have heard of the game. It's low risk to try it. They realise they really like it. They tell their friends. Some of their friends don't have Game Pass, but still want to play the game. They go out and buy it. So you actually get a sort of positive reinforcement effect for the game. So back in the old days, you used to have game demos. I don't know whether anybody in the call is old enough to remember magazines with cover mount demos and things. But there's a low cost to the player to have a go at trying it. And I think that's hugely good for creativity, because it also means games that don't have massive marketing budgets can get to millions of eyeballs, and can potentially rise above the commercial restrictions that they might have. So I think they're great, and they're very useful for us. You've obviously got to have a good relationship with the vendors like Sony and Microsoft. But ultimately, if you make good games, then that good relationship is going to build anyway over time.
I suppose on that point, really, you mentioned Atomfall. I guess with it being a new IP for Rebellion and games industry at the moment, it feels like launching a kind of brand new IP in a mould that you maybe not so known for. Almost seems heretical at the moment, doesn't it? Because people are so risk averse. Does Atomfall, did it ever feel like a risk for the company, or and is that something that you think more companies maybe should be doing, taking a bit more of a chance on something?
I wouldn't want to suggest what other companies should do. They can sail their own boat, if you like, do whatever they want. Good luck to them. I don't think making new games is risky. I think the opposite. I think not making new games is the most risk in the end. We do sequels. Sniper Elite Resistance is out, and that's a sort of a follow-up to the last Sniper Elite game we did, and that's done very, very well. but people also want new games as well. And I think, especially as an independent developer like us, we can afford to risk flinging the odd new concept out there, the odd game that perhaps might not be greenlit by a big organization because there isn't enough data around it. So I think we should. I think in a proper independent games development studio like Rebellion, I think we try to keep a balance of sequels, proven things that are proven hits, and things that we need to innovate with, because we've got a lot of creative people and we've got to keep them going as well. And I don't want to just be making games that are rinse and repeat games. I want to be pushing the art form, because making games is an art form as well as a commercial art form. I want to keep doing things that keep us awake at night sometimes with worrying whether people will get it. And I think that's motivating for the creative process.